Sin City is cold and empty. No one's around to judge me. I can't see clearly when you're gone. I'm blinded by the lights. I'm drowning in the night. How many songs has my generation made about loneliness? How many cries for help? How many movies and TV shows where a group of friends has to learn how to be a family again and save the day? Whether that's in an office setting or a wormhole above New York City. Welcome back to the Mad Ramble, the podcast where I try to save the world through a new human revolution, one listener at a time. My name is Astiago de Tropica, the laid-back madman from the near future, and I'll be y'all's guide in building a better world. And right now, the signs are obvious that we're doing something wrong as a civilization. Look at the depression, the suicides, the opioid pill popping, the rolling up of countless joints, all the bottles, being drinking, and all the Netflix binging going on. All these things we do to ignore the pain of how inhumanly and inhumanely alone we've made ourselves in the name of supposed progress. I wouldn't wish solitary confinement on my worst enemy if I had one, because it's the worst torture you could think of for a human mind. And yet here, and now especially, we're doing it voluntarily, before the response to a minor plague made things worse. And it is a minor plague, without even 1 million dead yet as of August 20th. Because there's more than 7 billion humans in the world. We've seen far worse as a species. You'll get it or you won't. You do what you can to help or you don't. You live or you die. And death is certain anyway. Taxes aren't. Ben Franklin wasn't lying about that. He just didn't know how many different ways humans can organize ourselves, even if that organization destroys the idea of community and family and insists upon obedience to strangers. So why don't we be human again? To treat ourselves not as machines in a system, but as humans in our families and in our tribes. Because make no mistake, we are the ones who subjugate ourselves through voluntary servitude. Every slave has a choice, whether or not they know it, and often they're kept from knowing. But authority, the obedience to strangers, oppression, the constant rise and fall of regimes, and endless excuses of exploitation, like divine right, or racial inequality, or the one true religion, or Marxism, fascism, the greater good, fear. Fear of endless boogeymen, real and imagined, and often exaggerated, like a plague or injustice in society, whether economic or racial or class and case-based, it never ends. Just like that sentence, and just like those emergency government powers. And you can blame the politicians all you want to. You can blame the 1%, the bourgeoisie, the opposing political party, the warlords and the dictators. But in the end, the blame lies at all our feet together. Whether we know it or not, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not. We have the power to choose a better way. A human way. Nat Turner did. The captives of the Amistad did. John Brown did. Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. both chose it. William Wallace, George Washington, Miguel Hidalgo. Countless heroes and martyrs for the cause of freedom. Even if some of those people were batshit insane. And many were more violent than they had to be. But they still stood up when it counted. And it counts now more than ever because we live in the now. Before us, today, lies a choice. On one hand, we got all the different dystopias we've come up with over the years in the form of 1984 or Fallout or The Man in the High Castle, The Matrix, or even Wall-E. But on the other lies the brightest future never imagined, because it is unimaginably great. Not quite a utopia, because the cynics will never let me use that word, but as close as we can get. An ever-improving world by our hand, where we work together rather than against each other to be human, to stop forcing conformity on people outside of our tribes, but to guarantee community and family to all. And it's not utopian. It's the human way of living, a way that we've been arrogantly ignoring to our great suffering for all these years of civilization. Because we know now that we don't know better than our own nature, our human nature. We have anthropology and sociology and psychology and countless other fields that have revealed how we best operate as a species, as a people, as a tribe, a family, and an individual. That way, the way, my brothers and sisters of humankind, and Mandalore beyond, is simply by accepting our instincts, our natural behavior, rather than saying that we know better. To rebuild our small communities, instead of fighting alone in the darkness, because in the dark, no one's got your back. But around the fire, that fire you know very well, was shoulder to shoulder until the end. The point of life is to live. Not to work, not to serve, not to suffer, not to consume luxury at the expense of all else. It's simply to live, to survive, and hopefully to thrive. So I offer y'all the choice that you already have. To be human, or to be a self-made slave. And it seems impossible now to live that glorious life of friendship and security, of no longer being lonely, because you might feel powerless to change it against what seems like a monolith or a mountain of government and corporations and political parties and a seemingly corrupt and broken society as a whole. But you are not powerless. You never were. You have the power right now to build what you think is that crazy-ass dream of a utopia. Both by the small things, by asking that girl out next door, by going home from work early to see your kids instead of pulling overtime, by sticking by your friends when they need you the most, and by the endless other examples I could give. But also by the big steps. The steps to revolution. A peaceful one, to build that better world. A secular salvation from isolation, from depression and addiction. The solution for everything from school shootings to silly political divisions to economic recession. As long as we commit not necessarily to it, but to each other. And the first step is by minimizing your dependence and your vulnerability to the greater economy. To embrace minimalism. To reject consumerism and superfluous luxury to achieve true freedom. The second is to find like-minded individuals that share or are willing to share in the same or similar culture. And together to rebuild community. Then here's where it might get radical for some, to buy land, to own communally, to both live and work and learn on, to have each other's backs in this new tribe or town or city block. Because now, you can't get evicted. You haven't committed your time in a job working for strangers. All your work now helps you directly and indirectly because it's for the group that you are a part of. And that leads to step 3. Self-sufficiency of that group as much as possible. Growing a big part of your own food, which is both easier and more fun than you might imagine. Not to mention healthier, perhaps tastier to me, but you can learn to love it. And at the same time, you keep more money within the group rather than going to some corporation. But also, the big thing is creating a local industry, or several, for the group. I don't mean by like a factory, although you might be producing a direct product, but an example would be selling some of that food that you grow, or having a cafe or a restaurant or a dog daycare center, or buy a service going out into other communities like painting or plumbing, or an endless variety of small enterprises. I mean, y'all's creativity and expertise will determine which direction you go in. And all the wealth you get from it can stay within the community, or in time be traded between other communities that share those same values of being human again. And you no longer have to work as hard as you do now, more than likely. Because technology has been progressed to the point of making life pretty damn easy. Especially when you no longer owe money for rent or for food half the time. So you don't have to work for other people, only with the people who work with you. This system will be way more efficient than our current society, because it won't be a mass society anymore. It'll be communities that look out for their members. And if you happen not to fit in, don't worry, I don't fit in either. And there's plenty of us to make a new community of our own, rather than being the eternal black sheep. But this way, we'll be able to handle plagues, for example, far better than what we have now. It'll be better able to handle problems of policing and justice, or of education, with a community school rather than every kid out on their own or crammed into a public system that doesn't care about them and doesn't care or is able to care if they fall through the cracks. A way of life that can weather and reject economic cycles of recession and depression, because those are all man-made. We don't have to have economic downturns and mass layoffs. Those are entirely avoidable. They're caused by technology just being too good at making everything more efficient. So that now we have way too much stuff, which George Carlin loved to talk about, that we could ever consume. And when the demand falls, the economy has to shrink because it's making things we don't need. Look how much food gets thrown away. Look how stupidly large so many houses have become. All those stores that sell things no one really needs. All the jobs that are non-essential in keeping us alive. It's crazy. Most of the economy is pointless. Just let a bunch of marketing scams to try and make money, when if we lived in communities, we wouldn't have to play that game on each other of endless manipulation. The solution so far has been to layer up consumers with more debt, with credit, to go and buy all those things that we don't really need, in the form of credit cards, or mortgages, or refinancing, and car payments, student loans, etc. It's an endless amount of tricks, but all it does, despite the breakneck and short-term growth built off of debt, is crash the economy faster. Because the greed of the finance system will dig its own grave over and over again. It happened all the way back in the Roman Empire, with the rudimentary banking houses they had. All it takes is one little push, and the house of cards collapses, or the bubble pops. And the people hurt the worst are those on the bottom, who depend upon this inefficient system for survival, even though it treats them like machines rather than humans. Take a look at something like the fight for $15 minimum wage. How is that a victory to get a law passed for it? That's like having an abusive relationship and the police roll by once in a while to make sure that the abuser does the dishes. Why would you want a job where you don't matter to the people you're working for? Why not do it in a co-op instead, or in a true community where a stranger doesn't lay off workers that they see as numbers rather than as people? Marx was right about class conflict existing in capitalism. But why do you have to have that conflict in the first place, when you could just walk away and build a better life together with your peers? You don't need that violent struggle, when instead all the class interests can converge on simply being human. You don't need the constant replacement of new regimes with another authority, replaced by the next, no matter what their excuse for having power over others is. In liberalism, conservatism, fascism, communism, religious fundamentalism, it really doesn't matter a whole lot what their ideology is. It just matters whether or not they want to be large and in charge or not. You don't have to hate the ruling class, whoever they might be, wherever you might live. You don't have to single out any one group as the problem child of society when the blame is shared among all of us for passively supporting the system. You don't hate the player, you hate the game. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to play a different one. My name's been Astiago de Tropica, and I hope y'all got something to think about out of all this madness. I publish episodes on Friday, although not every week sometimes, as I do this operation entirely alone at the moment, although hopefully that'll change in the near future. If you do want to live a better life, then you can join the conversation at our Facebook page, or feel free to like, comment, and subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be listening on to spread the message further. But until next time, thanks for listening. I hope y'all have a better day than a bread box. Paz, viva esta revolución.